How did people survive the cold in the Wild West? You'll be shocked when you learn the truth. Before us lie the endless, snow-covered plains of North America, where the winter wind howls with icy fury. In this harsh world, in the middle of a snowy ocean, stands a lone cone-shaped structure. A teepee, seemingly fragile and defenseless. It seems incredible that inside this simple dwelling made of skins and poles, people could not only survive but also comfortably endure winters, where temperatures dropped to extreme lows. For modern people, accustomed to central heating and multiple layers of insulation, it is difficult to imagine spending a night in such a dwelling without risking their lives. We think of a teepee as a primitive hut, incapable of withstanding the real cold. But this simplicity is deceptive, because behind it lies a perfect engineering system honed over centuries. This story is not about survival on the edge, but about the ingenious resourcefulness that turned a few skins and sticks into a warm and cozy home. Watch the video to the end, and you will learn how Native Americans managed to sleep in a teepee without freezing to death and what secrets this seemingly simple structure holds. What if I told you that a teepee is not just a tent, but a perfect aerodynamic machine? Its conical shape, which many consider primitive, is actually the result of a deep understanding of the laws of physics. It is not a random choice, but a key element of survival on the Great Plains, where there are no barriers to hurricane-force winds. Unlike square or rectangular structures, which create high resistance, the smooth conical shape of the teepee allows the wind to flow around it with minimal pressure. The strongest gusts simply slide down the sloping walls, finding no foothold to overturn or damage the structure. This makes the teepee incredibly stable even during the most violent storms. Moreover, the cone has a slight slope. The rear, steeper side faced the prevailing winds, which further increased its stability. The front, gentler side with the entrance remained in an aerodynamic shadow, protected from the direct impact of the elements. The base of the teepee was not a perfect circle, but rather egg-shaped. This shifted the center of the structure and the hearth closer to the entrance. This solution optimized the interior space and improved air circulation. The frame, made of long, flexible pine or fir poles, acted as a single elastic system. Under wind pressure, the poles could bend slightly, absorbing the energy of the gust, and then return to their original position. This prevented the structure from collapsing, whereas a rigid frame would simply break. The installation of the teepee itself was a quick and smooth process. First, a base of 3 or 4 main poles was installed, forming a sturdy tripod. Then the remaining poles were laid on this base, creating a symmetrical frame. The frame was covered with a cover made of sewn bison skins. The cover was attached to one of the poles and lifted with it, after which it was wrapped around the frame. At the bottom, its edges were securely fastened to the ground with wooden pegs. This design philosophy, based on observation and understanding of natural forces, allowed for the creation of nearly perfect solutions. We would be very interested to hear your point of view. What do you think about how ancient technologies can be more effective than some modern solutions? Write about it in the comments. Are you ready to learn the truth about the main material used to build teepees? The covering, or outer shell, was not just a piece of leather, but a true high-tech membrane of its time. It took 8 to 20 carefully processed bison hides to make it, and their quality directly determined whether the dwelling would be warm and dry. The manufacturing process was a long and laborious task, which was carried out by the women of the tribe. First, the remains of fat and meat were scraped off the fresh hide using bone or stone scrapers. Then the hide was stretched out on the ground with the fur facing down, secured with pegs and left to dry in the sun. After drying, the most important stage began: tanning. For this, they used a mixture of animal brains and liver, natural emulsifiers that made the skin soft and durable. This mixture was thoroughly rubbed into the surface of the skin so that it deeply saturated the fibers. Next, the skin was repeatedly kneaded and stretched to break down the dense structure of the collagen fibers. This process could take several days and required considerable physical effort. As a result, the rough and stiff raw hide was transformed into soft and elastic suede. To protect against moisture and make the hides smoke-resistant, they were smoked. To do this, they were stretched over a tent-like frame, and a smoky fire was lit inside using rotten wood. The smoke impregnated the leather, making it water-repellent and resistant to decay. When the individual skins were ready, they were sewn together. For this, they used a bone awl and threads made from animal tendons. The tendons were soaked, separated into thin fibers, and twisted into a strong thread, which, when dry, tightened the seams, making them almost airtight. The shape of the cover was complex and was cut according to a precise pattern resembling a semicircle. The accuracy of the cut and the quality of the seams determined how tightly the cover would fit onto the frame. Any gaps or looseness could become a source of drafts. Thus, the outer shell of the teepee was not just a shelter from the weather. It was a complex, multi-layered system that provided protection, strength, and durability for the entire dwelling. But the skin was only the outer layer of defense against the cold. Are you ready to learn about the secret second shell, which was the key to warmth? I will reveal the most closely guarded secret of warmth in a teepee, which few people know about. The key to a comfortable winter was not the outer covering, but the inner lining, known to the Lakota tribes as ozon. It was, in essence, a second wall made of thinner, processed skins, which was hung from poles at human height. This lining did not reach the very top and did not touch the ground, creating a closed airspace between itself and the outer wall. This air gap, 15-20 centimeters thick, was the main secret of thermal insulation. It worked on the same principle as modern double-glazed windows, significantly slowing down heat loss. Cold air that could seep through the bottom edge of the outer covering did not immediately enter the living space. Instead, it ended up in this air chamber. There, it slowly heated up from the heat of the hearth and the inner wall, after which it rose smoothly upward. This process created a constant and slow circulation of air. The heated air from the hearth rose to the smoke hole, while the colder air from the walls descended, entered the air gap, and was heated again. This prevented drafts and ensured even heat distribution. The ozon also performed another important function. It protected against condensation. In cold weather, moisture could form on the inner surface of the outer cover. The inner lining prevented this moisture from dripping onto people and belongings by collecting it on itself from where it then evaporated. This inner wall also served to organize the space. Personal belongings, amulets, or weapons could be hung on it. Ozon was often decorated with drawings depicting important events in the life of the family, hunting scenes, or mythological subjects. Thus, the living space inside the teepee was much smaller than its external dimensions. People lived inside this cozy cocoon, protected from the cold outer walls. This made it possible to heat a much smaller volume of air, saving fuel. Without the inner lining, the teepee would have been just a tent, blown through by all the winds. It was the ozon that turned it into a real home, capable of withstanding the most severe frosts. This simple but ingenious solution was the pinnacle of indigenous engineering. What if everything you've been taught about a simple campfire is outdated? The hearth in a teepee was not just a fire for heating, but the heart of a complex heating and ventilation system. Its size and location were carefully calculated for maximum efficiency and safety. Contrary to popular belief, the fire in a teepee was never large. It was usually a very small, compact fire, no more than 30-40 centimeters in diameter. A large fire would consume too much wood and create excessive heat and smoke, making it unbearable to stay inside. The secret to efficiency was to maintain a small but intense flame. To do this, only dry wood was used, which produced a lot of heat and little smoke. Most often, this was poplar or willow wood, which grew in abundance in river valleys. The hearth was not located strictly in the center, but was slightly offset towards the entrance. This arrangement was due to the egg-shaped base of the teepee. This created more living space in the rear, more spacious part of the dwelling, where the sleeping places were located. This offset also played an important role in air circulation. Cold air entering through the slightly open entrance immediately reached the fire and heated up. This created a draft that helped warm air and smoke rise up to the smoke hole. Stones were laid around the hearth. During the day, they accumulated heat from the fire, and at night, when the fire died down, they slowly released it, maintaining a comfortable temperature. It was a simple and effective heat storage system. Maintaining the fire was an important responsibility. Throughout the day and evening, someone always kept an eye on the fire, adding wood at the right time. At night, the fire was reduced to a minimum, leaving only smoldering coals that provided enough heat until morning. Thus, the hearth was not just a source of heat, but the engine that powered the entire air circulation system in the teepee. But how did they manage to control the smoke without suffocating inside what seemed to be an airtight space? In the next chapter, you will learn about the ingenious chimney of the teepee. At the top of the teepee, where all the poles converge, there was a smoke hole. But it was not just a hole in the roof. It was a complex adjustable system consisting of two special valves, or ears, which were the main secret to effective smoke removal. These valves were two additional rectangular pieces of hide that were part of the main covering. A long separate pole was attached to each of these ears. These two poles were not part of the main frame, but stood on the ground outside the teepee. With the help of these poles, it was possible to change the position of the valves, opening, closing, or turning them at any angle. This allowed for precise adjustment of the draft and direction of smoke exit depending on the strength and direction of the wind. Controlling these poles was a real art. When there was no wind outside, the valves were spread apart, opening the smoke hole as wide as possible. This allowed the smoke from the fire to rise freely and escape outside. Simple vertical draft worked flawlessly. In strong winds, the situation changed. A skilled owner of a teepee would turn the valves to create a barrier on the windward side. On the leeward side, on the contrary, they left an open gap into which the wind, flowing around the cone, would draw the smoke out. This principle, known in aerodynamics as the Venturi effect, created a low-pressure zone in the smoke hole. This zone literally sucked the smoke out of the dwelling, preventing it from accumulating inside. Even in hurricane-force winds, there was not the slightest smoke inside the teepee. During rain or snowfall, the valves could be moved almost completely, leaving only a small gap for smoke to escape. This protected the hearth and interior from precipitation. Thus, the teepee remained dry in any weather. At night, when the fire was almost extinguished, the smoke hole could be closed almost completely. This allowed maximum heat to be retained inside the dwelling. In the morning, it was opened again to start a fire. Controlling the valves required constant attention. During the day, their position could be changed several times to adapt to changing weather conditions. The comfort and safety of all the inhabitants of the dwelling depended on the correct adjustment of the ears. This simple but incredibly effective system was the pinnacle of adaptive architecture. It did not require complex mechanisms, working solely on the basis of an understanding of the laws of nature. It was these two valves that transformed the teepee from a smoky tent into a clean and bright dwelling. What if I told you that the floor of a teepee held just as much of a secret to warmth as its walls? People never sat or slept on the bare frozen ground. The base of the dwelling was a multi-layered insulation system that provided reliable protection from the cold coming from below. The first layer was the earthen floor itself. It was carefully leveled and sometimes even had a small depression in the center for a hearth. The earth, being a poor conductor of heat, served as a good insulator in itself. A thick layer of dry grass, fir branches, or reeds was laid on top of the earth. This layer created an air cushion that blocked the cold coming from the frozen ground. In addition, it made the floor softer and more comfortable. The next layer was hides. Most often, old or damaged tires from teepees or simply untreated rawhides were used. They were laid over the entire living space, creating a durable and wear-resistant floor. Finally, the top, warmest layer was made of tanned bison hides with thick fur. They were spread out with the fur facing up in the areas where people sat and slept. This fluffy carpet was incredibly warm and pleasant to the touch. Sleeping areas were arranged at the back of the teepee, away from the entrance. They were often raised above the general floor level. For this purpose, special structures made of willow rods, similar to mats or low couches, were used. These willow backrests, known as adam, served as both backrests when sitting and a base for the bed at night. They created an additional air layer under the sleeping area. At night, several layers of fur skins were laid on them. The same bison skins were used as blankets. One such skin, or robe, was so warm that one person could sleep comfortably under it, even in severe frost. Often, several people slept together under one large skin for extra warmth. The floor at the very edge of the teepee, between the living area and the outer wall, was often left open. This strip of cold earth served to collect condensation and moisture. It was also part of the air circulation system. Thus, the floor in a teepee was not just a surface, but a complex layer cake of several insulating layers. This system provided reliable protection from the cold coming from the ground. But the ideal design of a house is useless if it is in the wrong place. In the next chapter, you will learn how to choose a location for a winter camp. Choosing a location for a winter camp was no less important than the design of the dwelling itself. The Indians of the Great Plains had a deep knowledge of their land and used the landscape as natural protection from the winter elements. The right location for a camp could make life much easier during the harsh months. The ideal place for a winter camp was a river valley protected from the wind by high banks or hills. Such places, called bottoms, created their own microclimate. It was much warmer and windless here than on the open plains. Particular preference was given to places covered with dense groves of poplars or willows. The trees served as an excellent windbreak, dispersing the force of the icy winds. In addition, they were a source of dry wood, which was used for firewood. A nearby river or stream provided constant access to water. Even if the river froze over, water could always be found under the ice. River valleys also attracted animals, which made hunting easier in winter. The tipis in the camp were never placed randomly. They were arranged in a large circle, symbolizing the unity of the tribe. This arrangement also provided additional protection from the wind for the dwellings inside the circle. The entrance to each teepee almost always faced east. This was not only due to religious beliefs, according to which the east is the direction of the rising sun and new life. It also had a deep practical meaning. The prevailing winter winds on the Great Plains blew from the north and west. By placing the entrance on the east side, it was protected from the direct blast of cold air. In addition, the morning sun shining into the dwelling helped to warm and light it more quickly. Before setting up camp, the site was carefully inspected. Experienced people looked for signs that the place was safe. For example, they avoided low-lying areas where cold air could accumulate, or areas prone to avalanches in mountainous terrain. The length of stay in one place depended on the availability of resources, primarily firewood and pasture for horses. When resources were depleted, the camp was dismantled and moved to a new, pre-scouted location. The mobility of the teepee allowed this to be done quickly and efficiently. Thus, the winter camp was not just a cluster of dwellings, but a unified system integrated into the landscape. Native Americans did not build artificial fortresses. Their fortress was nature itself, which they knew how to read and use. Even in the most sheltered place, cold winds could penetrate the dwelling through the gaps between the bottom edge of the tire and the ground. To completely eliminate drafts, the Indians used a simple and ingenious technique. They created a foundation out of snow. This process was called banking. After setting up the teepee and stretching the tire, the men and women took wooden or bone shovels and began to shovel snow onto the base of the dwelling. The snow was piled up in a dense mound around the entire perimeter. The height of this mound could reach 60 to 80 centimeters. This snow barrier served several important functions at once. First, it completely sealed the lower part of the teepee, blocking any drafts. This was especially important in windy weather. Second, snow itself is an excellent heat insulator. Due to the large amount of air trapped between snowflakes, it does not conduct heat well. The snow embankment created an additional layer of insulation, reducing heat loss through the lower part of the walls. The dense snow also helped to secure the bottom edge of the cover more reliably. It pressed it to the ground, preventing the wind from lifting or tearing it off. This increased the overall stability and strength of the structure. In regions where there was little snow, turf or earth could be used instead. Pieces of turf were cut out and laid around the perimeter of the teepee, creating the same seal. In the spring, before moving, the turf could be laid back in place. The process of creating a snow wall was a collective effort. The entire community participated in fortifying their homes, helping each other. It was an important part of preparing for the long, cold winter. The inner edge of the tire was also covered with earth or weighed down with stones from the inside. This created double protection against drafts. No gust of wind could penetrate the living space from below. This simple technique significantly increased the energy efficiency of the dwelling. By retaining more heat, it allowed less firewood to be used. Fuel economy was critical in the long winter. Thus, in winter, the teepee seemed to grow into the ground, becoming one with the surrounding landscape. Snow, which seemed to be the main threat, became an ally and a building material. This is another example of how indigenous peoples used nature itself to protect themselves from it. Even in the warmest dwelling, it was impossible to do without the right clothing and bedding. The system of personal insulation was no less important than the construction of the teepee itself. The clothing of Native Americans was perfectly adapted to the harsh climate and consisted of a multi-layered and multifunctional system. The basis of winter clothing was items sewn from tanned deer, moose, or antelope skins. These skins were soft, durable, and lightweight. They were used to make shirts, leggings, and dresses. The principle of layering was key to retaining heat. Several thin layers of clothing retain heat better than one thick layer, as air pockets form between them. Depending on the temperature, layers could be removed or added. The warmest outer garment was a bison skin cape, or robe. It was worn with the fur on the inside so that the thick undercoat would trap warm air against the body. This cape was so warm that it was possible to wear it outside, even in severe frost. Special attention was paid to protecting the feet. Winter moccasins were made of thick leather and insulated with rabbit or beaver fur. Insoles made of dry grass were placed inside to absorb moisture and serve as additional insulation. Mittens made of leather and fur were used to protect the hands. The head was protected by hats made of beaver, fox, or coyote fur. These parts of the body are most susceptible to frostbite, so they were insulated with particular care. Clothing was loose and did not restrict movement. This was important for an active lifestyle, which did not stop in winter. The loose fit also promoted better air circulation and heat retention. At night, clothing was not completely removed. People slept in their undershirts or simply wrapped themselves in their daytime cloaks. This allowed them to retain body heat throughout the night. As already mentioned, the bed consisted of several layers of skins. The lower layers insulated against the cold coming from the floor, and the upper layers served as blankets. Sleeping under a heavy and warm bison skin was very cozy. Thus, each person carried their own thermal insulation system. This system was an extension of the tipi's general heating system. The person, their clothing, and their home worked as a single organism to combat the cold. In addition to all the engineering tricks, an important source of heat in the teepee was the human presence itself. A teepee was rarely a dwelling for one or two people. Usually, it housed a large family of several generations. The heat generated by several people's bodies contributed significantly to heating the small interior space. On cold evenings, the whole family gathered around the hearth. This was not only practical, but also strengthened social bonds. Winter was a time when active nomadic life came to a standstill. It was a time for socializing, storytelling, and performing rituals. Long winter evenings by the fire were the center of the community's social and spiritual life. The elders passed on the knowledge and traditions of the tribe to the young. Storytellers, or keepers of stories, recounted the creation of the world, the exploits of heroes, and the history of their people. These gatherings warmed not only the body, but also the soul. Women did needlework. They embroidered clothes with beads, repaired utensils, and wove mats. Men made and repaired weapons and crafted tools. All these activities took place in the warm communal space of the teepee. Cooking on the hearth also added warmth to the dwelling. The aromas of cooking meat or soup filled the house, creating a cozy atmosphere. Shared meals were an important part of everyday life. Even people's breath and body heat slightly increased the humidity. In the dry winter climate, this made the atmosphere inside more comfortable. The main thing was to prevent excessive humidity, which was handled by the ventilation system. Games and quiet entertainment were also part of winter life. Children played their games in the back of the teepee, trying not to disturb the adults. The atmosphere was peaceful and calm. Thus, social warmth was no less important than the warmth from the fire. The sense of community, security, and belonging to the family and tribe helped to survive the harshest times. The teepee was not just a shelter, but the center of a living, breathing community. The entire survival system was based on harmony. Harmony of design, harmony with nature, and harmony between people. It was this combination of engineering and social cohesion that allowed Native Americans not just to survive, but to live fully in the middle of the snow-covered plains. We can see that the teepee is far from a primitive hut. It is a complex and ingeniously designed system, each element of which performs an important function. From its aerodynamic shape to its multi-layered floor and clever ventilation system, Everything here is designed to create a comfortable and safe living space. The secret of warmth in a teepee lies not in a single element, but in their perfect interaction. It was a true smart home of its time, using the laws of physics and the forces of nature to protect itself from them. This technology, honed over centuries, demonstrates a deep respect and understanding of the surrounding world. The history of the teepee teaches us that efficiency does not always lie in the complexity and expensive materials. Sometimes the simplest and most elegant solutions, based on knowledge and observation, turn out to be the most perfect. This is a legacy of ingenuity and adaptability that deserves our admiration. What other aspects of indigenous peoples' lifestyles or technologies would you like to see in future videos? Suggest your topics in the comments. We are very interested in your opinion. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on new research into the mysteries of the past.